are still in an inflection point. We're not
Yeah.
quite fully past the point of no return in terms of all the dystopia that's happening.
Yes.
But it's a critical time, and it's an overwhelming time.
I wanted to take this moment to do a little mini-sode just to introduce you, the wonderful Rebecca Sun, who I fangirl over, and then we got connected because we're both moms, which I've talked a little bit on the podcast about how since becoming a mom, it's expanded my world in ways that I could never have dreamed. Certainly because of all the mother tropes, but in terms of the connections that I've gotten to have with other women who operate in a same sort of like space in our business, and having that be the connective tissue first and then like the business second has been so rewarding and unexpected and truly a gift. And so I want to thank you for embracing and yes anding my like sort of a random idea to be like, you should just come and be a part of this in some way because you're so brilliant and you've been doing such great work and advocating for a lot of the things that are important to me as a storyteller, but as a human. And I just think you're awesome. So I thank you for coming on this journey with me as we figure out exactly how this is going to work for us. But yeah, I'd love to like, just have you share a little bit about you and all the things.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you, Carolina. I mean, I will say that it's just been one of the completely unforeseen um, blessings of becoming a mom 2 years ago was how it really did open me up to this whole community of working mothers, stemming from this business, but also inclusive of people outside of it.
Yeah.
And it's just the most amazing tribe.
Yeah.
I can't say enough about it. And for you specifically, Carolina, it's been such a pleasure to just I don't know, I think especially in these times, we really I don't take for granted finding a kindred spirit and sort of the graciousness with which you want to extend a forum to me. Your forum to me is incredible. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I Up until now, I've been a career journalist. I've been a journalist for about 20 years now, and I started my career in sports. I was at Sports Illustrated, and then after 8 years, I moved from New York back to California, where I'm from, and very luckily was able to get a job at the Hollywood Reporter, where I was until last summer. And so I've spent the majority of my career, covering the entertainment business at THR. Um, have grown and learned a lot professionally about the business, about myself. Most recently, so my first 8 years at THR, I was a reporter at large, although I had a mini beat, which was the talent agencies. So, like first 8 years, I would write about anything, but I specifically focused on the talent agency business, which was really a crash course in like pretty hardcore business reporting. I started right around the time that WME was looking to acquire IMG. And
Mhm.
so that was just like a crash course in mergers and acquisitions 101, and really had to um, overcome a lot of things that had plagued me my whole career, like imposter syndrome and feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't understand this. I don't have any experience covering this. I came from sports. What am I doing here? But I really I'm so thankful to so many of the, especially the execs and the sources that I worked with, at the agencies at that time who were really patient in breaking down for me these concepts and working with me to sort of bolster my confidence in covering that field. So that was the first 8 years. And then 2020 got laid off along with many, many, many people during the pandemic. Um, in addition to agencies reporting, I had become known for there wasn't a name for this beat yet, but I was very interested in using the time I had remaining, like at work, to look for stories that involved communities of people who were historically excluded. from the business. I was really interested in, like, whenever, there were institutions like USC's Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and other groups that would periodically put out these reports about the demographics of the business and who was being employed and who wasn't. And that wasn't really designated to anybody. And so I started picking up a lot of that coverage. I was like really interested in covering the state of belonging in the business. And so that was something I was sort of became internally known for. April 2020 got laid off because they were like, sorry, we can only focus on core business issues right now.
Hmm.
A month later, George Floyd was killed. And by the end of the year, they had come back and asked me to there was an ownership change. I think most of your listeners would know at that point.
Yeah.
During 2020, The Hollywood Reporter was acquired by Penske Media. And so Jay, to his credit, canvassed all of the new employees that he had acquired and asked them, just for feedback on what they'd like to see. And I will eternally be grateful that enough of my colleagues mentioned, sort of name checked me and said, you should bring Rebecca back to focus on diversity and inclusion coverage for us. And so that's what I did. And I did that for 4 years until last summer when, again, if you've read the news, there are two major fields that are on the decline in the United States right now, and that's diversity work and journalism. so, so I was right in the crosshairs of that, laid off again. And people have been so nice. They've been like, oh my God, I'm so shocked. And I really, really appreciate that. The only thing I was not sure about was the timing of when I would lose that job. I knew I would lose that job. I kind of knew I would lose that job when I took the job.
Mm.
Because I think that I've lived as a person who understands marginalized identities in this country long enough to kind of to see an opportunity when it presented itself. And I really mean that as the opportunity to just sort of devote 24/7 of my working bandwidth to covering diversity and inclusion, I saw was a fleeting opportunity. It was like, somebody is not going to be willing to pay you to do this forever.
Right.
So if this is something that you want to take on right now, and at that point I had, I'd worked enough, more than 15 years that I felt confident enough in my seniority, in my career that I could do this without pigeonholing myself. I do wonder if that's happened a little bit still.
Mm.
Like it's, since then, the types of opportunities that sort of initially availed themselves to me, since I was laid off, I was like, I wonder if now this has come to define me. But I also don't regret it.
Mm.
I truly don't. I think it was a real privilege to have the opportunity to write about and talk to like a wide variety of people, for my job for as many years as I did. And I've learned a lot, and I sort of have, and we can get into this now or in the future. I have a lot of evolving thoughts about where this type of work, the work of, the current term is belonging, but essentially the work of trying to make sure that you are considering all of the deserving voices that are out there. That type of work, it's really interesting how it will necessarily have to shift in this kind of climate. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. I've been doing some moves towards that, but that is a very meandering way to tell you how I got to this seat right now, where I am right now. I hope any of that made sense.
It made total sense. I am so curious, when you went from sports into entertainment, was that meant to be like a gig at the time that turned into sort of a longer job, or did you intentionally want to pivot into entertainment?
So it was actually the other way around. It's so like I never intended to be involved in sports journalism at all. And it's funny because now I have two different sports publications on my resume. I also was an editor at Sportico, which is a sports business
Mhm.
publication, for a little bit. That was really just being in the right place at the right time. I didn't have so for people who don't know, like if you didn't grow up reading Sports Illustrated, because you just didn't consider yourself a sports fan, Sports Illustrated, the legacy of SI. So before it also changed a ton of, ownership hands. But historically, Sports Illustrated is just one of the finest publications in American print journalism, period.
Wow.
Like
I don't think I knew that.
founded in the 1940s. Like, I mean, Hunter S. Thompson, Hemingway, like it published incredible, like Plimpton, it published these incredible award-winning writers. It was just real literature about the human spirit uh, as told through athletic competition. I mean, I will forever be grateful that I started my career there, but it was just so unexpected. People would sometimes ask me when I said I worked at SI, of course, the first question would be like, "Oh, are you a big sports fan?" Which is a sexist question because they don't ask that if a guy says they work at Sports Illustrated. But in my case, it was true that I ended up at SI not because I grew up a sports fan. I grew up a fan of certain sports, but simply because the powers that be there thought I was promising enough as a journalist to be able to do that kind of work. And so that's partly why I left, though, because I
Mhm.
did feel after 8 years that I had reached my own personal ceiling for how much I could grow in that. I kind of ended up on the editor track at SI when I was there. And because I truly didn't feel like I had enough ingrained institutional knowledge about sports to really succeed as a writer at SI. Like I just really felt like that was beyond my own um my own abilities. And so this is another thing for people who aren't familiar with like the workings of news media. Sports Illustrated was owned by Time Inc., which was the largest magazine publisher in
Mm.
the country. Time, Entertainment Weekly, People, In Style, like if you think of a major national magazine, chances
They
are
own
it
it,
was a
yeah.
Time Inc. publication.
Yeah.
Um, Time Inc., part of Time Warner, merged with AOL, one of the historically most disastrous corporate mergers, right, in history. So AOL, Time Warner, they merged. That was the beginning of the end. It was it was a really bad business decision eventually. And so for the 8 years that I was there, every 2 years there would be workforce reductions, and because we were unionized, the company had to first ask for volunteers to take buyout packages before they could start involuntarily eliminating jobs. And so every 2 years, that was just like a fact of life. Every 2 years, like they're going to call the herd, and I sort of, after surviving for 8 years, by that point, I was sort of like, okay, I think I've reached the ceiling of what I can do at SI. Personally, like my parents, like my dad got sick back on the West Coast. I was like, I think I need to make this move. I think that I don't think I'm ever going to get fired from here. So I think I'm going to just raise my hand and take a buyout. So that's why I took the buyout. I think I sort of wanted to expand my career and also be closer to home. So I moved back to California. It was actually I love the opportunity to tell this story. I kind of cold emailed a former Sports Illustrated editor who I knew was working in Hollywood, who had sort of made the transition to TV writer. And his name was Albert Kim. And he knew Janice Min, who was the editor in chief at the Hollywood Reporter at the time. And I was like, "Hey, Albert, I was just a scrubby fact checker when you were an editor here. I'm moving to LA looking for a job. Can you help me?" And he just passed my resume along to Janice, and I was at the right place at the right time. They
Yeah.
had an opening, they were looking, and so that's how I got plugged in. But I think that THR was always a much more natural fit for me because I was always more interested in certainly pop culture and arts and entertainment, but also media. and media as a vehicle and as a force,
Mm.
in society. And so that was great. And Albert, for those of you who didn't immediately, sort of twinge onto the name, Albert is now the showrunner of Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix. So he's gone on to become enormously successful, and I will always be grateful for how I really give him a lot of credit for my career here.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And what year was it that you started at THR?
2013.
So yeah, you were sort of there on the beginning of the boom of like the streaming
Mm-hmm.
era that we've entered. I remember like I was fortunate to be, if you want to use that word. I think it's a good word to use for this. But I worked on Netflix's first or independent original feature film that they shot. That was 2015, 2016. And it's really wild to think about the last decade plus of how this exponential explosive growth has happened across the streamers and obviously Netflix, because it just like these last 10 years have been very marking for a lot of reasons, right? You had this huge boom, and now we've been on sort of this downcline. And a lot of women who are more senior to me, more experienced to me than me, who've been here 20 years longer than me, say, oh, this is just the undulations of the business. Like they've lived through a lot of these shifts in the volatility of the market. But then others tell me that this is also unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
This what is happening isn't just like these other shifts and other strikes that we've had and other mergers. It's really harrowing, I guess is the word I would use, because a lot of the jobs, the difference I think is that there were so many jobs that were created during those 5 years to keep up with the demand that now cease to exist and will probably never come back to the same volume that they were, that they existed before, because the demand isn't there and it's a compression across everything. So I guess I'm curious, all of that to say, like, with from your perspective, like what has been the biggest shift that you've seen, from the journalism side, the media side, of how this time has impacted sort of um, the conversations that you're in and the
Mm-hmm.
what you're seeing on your side?
Yeah. I think that those two perspectives you outlined, uh, both get at the truth, because certainly the shape of undulations is just the way that history works, right?
Right.
Um, Ups and downs. And so certainly there have been ups before, there have been downs, and there will be again. But I do think that they're not necessarily the same. And sometimes it depends on who you ask,
Mm,
because depending on where you sit in terms of how impacted you are by it, that definitely affects uh your how rosy you are about, oh, this is fine, it'll pass, we'll be back to it, right? So
sure, sure,
definitely
sure, sure.
who's saying that matters. That's something that I sort of noticed from
That's right.
my coverage. I also think that there is definitely a convergence of factors, like in this current contraction, that that multiple things are happening at once, and some of these factors are unprecedented. So you can say that labor disputes have happened before, and they'll happen again. But there was never a time in this industry when there were as many people and as many players at the table as there were now, right? And that's just sort of a neutral
Mm,
objective fact. Like, whatever you want to do with that, however you want to interpret that information, that is just the case. There's more play. So there's definitely more, like, there's more players, like from a sort of a organizational standpoint. There's more like buyers, there's more platforms, but there's also more people. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of people who weren't even given a shot before.
yeah,
So that was, so that's due. But I think that the biggest factor is technology, which,
yeah.
by definition has no precedent. And the way and technology also changes at an exponential rate. And so, it's not like, oh, you go from, like, whatever, radio to television to streaming or whatever. It's like, it's like we
Yeah.
can't, it just goes
Sharp.
yeah, it's sharp. And so you might have had an era, like whatever. I'm just making up these numbers, like, a radio era or whatever was like 50 years. And then the next era is like 40. But now it's like things, like whatever we're talking about right now in terms of the cutting edge of like technology and media is not what we're going to be talking about in 2 years
I know.
because the
It's
landscape will
crazy.
have changed so much. And so how we adapt to that I will say that big tech has impacted our respective fields in a major, major way. Obviously, you guys know it from your um, film and television content production perspective. Media, in the news media, it's really impacted us, not just in terms of what people talk about, the encroachment of replacing journalists with AI and stuff like that. That is still kind of like a pretty extreme case that has happened, but is not that widespread yet. But I think certainly once we shifted from being print this happened to SI, this happened at THR, so this has happened to most legacy publications. Once they shifted from print first to digital first to now, the new frontier. I mean, even the websites are kind of old news nowadays. People are talking about the newsletters. People are talking about your social, people have been talking about your social footprint for a publication. All of these frontiers change the way we try to present the information, that change the way we try to capture the attention economy. Um, I think that there's issues with news media both on the ownership end, and this is something again that is affecting film and television, where when you trace ownership to the very top, it's not an entity that exists to make movies. It's not an entity that exists
That's right.
to make publications. It's some private equity firm that just sees this as one of their many revenue streams and is mostly looking for like synergistic opportunities to
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And so certainly with media, that's the case. There's a vanishingly few number of major legacy publications that are still owned by people or entities that only exist to publish journalism. But
Mm,
then on the consumer end, I would say um, tech, like nowadays, everything is being like aggregated. So I think you might notice this, like, there are certain like Twitter accounts. There's this account called like Pop Crave or Pop whatever, I don't know, and it's got
mm,
one of those like Elon blue checks. And they're constantly being retweeted because they always have like, they'll retweet and they'll post like about a story, a headline, something like so and so got cast or so and so said this, and and everybody retweets it, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, like what is this new like entertainment publication on the scene? And it's like not an outlet. I think it's just a Twitter account. I have no idea who's behind it. It has the look of like an EW or whatever. It's a little more fandom skewing, but sometimes
mm.
it does intersect. Like it'll aggregate what the trades report. And so like, say I wrote an extensively researched feature at THR and THR dutifully like tweeted the story and whatever. And then Pop Crave like grabs whatever the most, impressive quote was from it. And then they kind of read, and I don't even know who's doing this. Is this a bot? I have no clue. I have no clue.
Whoa.
But
Definitely need
like,
to look into that.
and it'll just get like retweeted, and with no attribute, you don't know where that came from. You don't know where can I read more about this story? I don't know because PopCrave doesn't provide links to an article because there's no website. I think it's called PopCrave. I don't know. But but
Interesting.
there's a lot of things like that going on, and that all like I don't know. It all contributes to like media illiteracy, like people just like getting used to like just not making that second click to be like, where is this information from?
Right. Right. Like actually having a thought and perspective on, wait, what is this? What am I reading? Instead of just mindlessly resharing or reposting or getting whatever feelings you have about it and just taking it as absolute truth. I think that the danger with that obviously is the contextualizing of something that wasn't what it was intended to be,
Mhm.
and people then taking that as absolute truth. And obviously, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but we're living in a time with so many fake news and deep fakes and the sort of like the scariness of what AI can do, and the compounding factor of that and the velocity and the sort of it's just overwhelming for any human to try to
Mhm.
like take that down is what I'm trying to say. And so it's it's pretty scary, and I guess, like, not to be doom and gloom about it, but thinking about as moms with our kids and, like, I know our kids are still obviously really far from being truly impacted by this, but I think about what of this time is going to be what makes the quote unquote "history books." Like, when kids are
Mhm.
learning about this
If we
time
have
in
history
history, if
books.
we have history books or whatever it is, like, what of this period of the human history is actually going to be diluted into what? Like, and who's
Mm.
making those choices, Because if you have an AI take an aggregate of, like, all of what's happened over the last 10 years and give you, like, the 10 top, you know,
Mhm.
let's make sure this makes it into the history books. It's like, it's just a lot to contend with, and I think I think it's part of why I'm drawn to having you on is to sort of raise the mirror to people that are listening, hopefully in small and fun ways. It doesn't always have to be this deep, like, oh my God,
Mhm.
existential thing. I'm a Scorpio, so I live in that existential space like every day. I'm very intense is the word people use, but I prefer passionate. I
I
prefer
love it.
passionate.
I love it.
But, and just like having your perspective on how we can sort of like help people really understand that they still, for now, have the power with how they're going to
Mhm.
engage with this media, with this content, whether it's stories, whether it's what they're choosing to watch. Like, I have so many friends who are like, "Oh yeah, I hate that show. I just leave it on in the background while it's watching while I'm like doing the dishes," right? Friends that are not in the industry. And I was like, "Okay, but do you understand that what you're doing is telling the Netflix algorithm that this is what they should make more of? And then that impacts my ability to sell something that you would actually want to watch because
Mhm.
again, it's just this data point. Um, and again, so I think the more that we can kind of like through these conversations, hopefully just hold up a mirror and help people just approach this from a lens of like real curiosity, because I think we have been and are still in and will continue to be in a moment in time that is very rocky and
Mhm.
to your point, like your perspectives and your sort of journey into this moment in time as a human is going to influence how you engage with this reality, what color the
Mhm.
glasses are that you're wearing. And so yeah, so I think it's really important. So I think that's part of why I think we're gonna like go on this journey together to figure out how we best utilize your beautiful brain and everything that you've learned so far to help us kind of like, I don't know, stay the course, whatever course that is, who knows?
Mhm.
I've always had the intention since I started to talk to other people and other perspectives, like, but producing was for me like the low-hanging fruit in the sense that like these are conversations with individuals that are on the margins, not all of them, but most of them, of the conversation, who don't get a moment to share their stories, who don't get
Mhm.
to share their paths, their struggles with the industry collectively. I'm having these conversations all day long, they're just not being recorded. And so
Mhm.
now that I've
Yeah,
been
same.
doing that for 5 years, it's almost like, all right, like what's next? How do we evolve from here? Because it's just becoming bigger and bigger. So yeah, so I'm just super stoked that you're on the journey with us to evolve into whatever this is gonna be?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I told you this offline too, but that this is definitely it's cathartic for me as well because I think that there is so much going on. I do have first of all, like I love chopping it up and I love chopping it up with smart people. And so even
Same.
if we weren't recording this, if you were like, "Hey Rebecca, let's just chat for 30 minutes every 2 weeks or whatever." I'd be like, "I'm down." Um but I also feel like like you mentioned, we are still in an inflection point. We're not
Yeah.
quite fully past the point of no return in terms of all the dystopia that's happening.
Yes.
But it's a critical time and it's an overwhelming time, which is why I do think that part of like it helps me because I don't know if you're like this, but like unlike 2016, I have been less eager to engage with the news. And I'm like that my whole job, my whole career has been news. But
Yeah.
it's very, because I don't know what to do with all this energy that builds up in my head when I read something.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really helpful. It can still be healing, not to just like sit around and like bitch to the choir, but
Right.
more like, first of all, sort of name something and be like, no, we're not crazy. Like, this is this is beyond the norm, like what's happening right now. No, the emperor still has no clothes. We're like we're still not going to get used to this. We're not going to allow ourselves to get used to this, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of sane washing going on right now. Sane
That's
washing
right.
is a term where you're normalizing, right? Activity that should not be normalized. And also maybe even just to offer takeaways that are like best practices. If I can like use my like, I really love the fact that I've learned, now that I'm getting a little bit out of my journalism only bubble, like I've learned that there are folks who are curious and they do want to know, like, oh, like is like I didn't know this about the media. I didn't know this about aggregation or whatever. And so if I can
Yeah.
offer like a very simple, applicable best practice for what you can do to like improve your own media hygiene,
Mm.
or your framing of what's happening. The other thing that because of the spaces I worked in with talking about equity, which is still it's a noble virtue. I don't know why equity has become sort of scapegoated as a term, but like, if those are things that you're like, what can you do, like your thing right now, to keep yourself sane, to continue to push back against the net negative that's happening,
Yes.
to keep our
Yes.
industry thriving, to keep ourselves holistic selves.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
it makes me feel less bad, less
Yeah,
bad. What we're
it's
aiming for.
inspiring to know, because I think my fear is that all of these brilliant people who have given decades of themselves into this industry just throw up their hands because of everything that's occurred, and the fire is compounding that,
Yeah.
and go, I am not welcomed here. There's no place for me here. And so I'm going to go elsewhere because I need to survive. And so I guess my hope is that, without being Pollyanna about it, that we can like fill our own well with the
Mm.
collective, like harnessing the collective power and knowledge that, like, for better or for worse, so many of us are in this boat and collectively are feeling this. And to your point, how do we channel this towards positivity as much as possible? And it's not to be uh uh diminishing of the fact that it's not to diminish the fact that we feel shitty and we have bad days, and there are days where we don't want to fight. And I have every other day, if you catch me on a good day, it's awesome. If you catch me on a bad day, I'm like, what else should I be doing? Where else can I
Mhm.
take my skill sets? Like this, there, it's like, if for me, that's been my whole career here, so that doesn't feel that unusual. But I'm very honest about that, but yet I still keep coming back to, I still believe in this. I still believe in us. I
Mhm.
still believe in the power of stories and our perspectives to help inform identity and conversations, and help empower the next generation that's looking to us. And I would assume we're feeling a little lost in all of this,
Mhm.
to be here and to show up and to control their own narratives. I feel really passionate about doing that. And so I think that's, again, part of like this macro, as we expand what the show can be and what this brand is or whatever, like, that's who I want to reach. It's people that have felt like me my whole life. I think it's just,
Mm.
I chose entertainment, but I could have chosen anything else. But I know firsthand what it's like to not, to be invisible, to be mislabeled, to be
Mhm.
disregarded. And I've had to fight tooth and nail for everything that I have built and earned. And I'm so proud of that. And that's part of why I share my narrative so much, my story, because it's like I have carved a lane for myself in a place that continuously keeps putting more weeds for me to like take
Mm.
down
Mhm.
and my on my way to the castle, and I just can't seem to stop, which, is a conversation for me and my therapist, I suppose. But yeah, I still have the fire, so I still have the fire on most days, and I feel passionate about it's not about pushing through, it's about making sure that we can come out of this time not just sane, but like fulfilled within
Mhm.
ourselves,
Mhm.
regardless, like filling our own well with whatever it is that is important to us, and throwing our pebbles in to make this collective tsunami I always talk about in whatever
Mhm.
ways we can. I still think there's tremendous value in that, and I'm excited that you're a part of, I think, hopefully helping people, believe that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
So no
I'm
pressure.
100.
Yeah.
No worries. I'm here for it, I truly am, and, I love I mean, again, it's fascinating to me that it's so rare to have a female-led, show like yours that has, covered this space for so long. Um, it's fascinating because there are so many women working in this industry,
Mhm.
but the narrative has always been framed, from the by the other gender, and it's like, I don't know, there's just a lot of ways in which, um, I think that this is an overdue space
Yeah.
for these conversations, and it's truly an expansive one. I think that that's what's awesome. I love, the variety of guests and topics that you have had, really show that, how do I say this? Like, what's the win? It's not like the win is not, creating something for fellow women to look up to or to gain something from. It's creating something for anybody, you know, of any background to glean something from, because there is no reason why we can only speak to our own.
That's right. And I'm not interested in that, frankly,
Yeah.
because that's an echo chamber that we've been in, and it's great and it's helpful to be in rooms where everyone looks like you and we can all clink our champagne glasses and go, "Yay!" "Yes, we're doing it." But if the whole isn't a part of that, then it's not that it doesn't matter. It's important, but like I'm interested in a much bigger conversation
Yeah.
that brings in everybody into the fold, and it's why, like, I don't have a direction in that sense. It's like I wanna speak to whoever feels interesting and has
Mhm.
something to offer that, like, collectively to our industry, regardless of where you are. It's not about, like, this
Exactly.
is for people who wanna produce. It's not about that. I think it's like this show is for anyone who wants to survive and
Mm.
dare thrive in a really hard industry that happens to be entertainment, but is akin to a lot of
Yeah.
industries. And how do we, like, and the next wave of that is like the fact that then we are women, and every industry has been male dominated for the most part since the beginning of time. So like that's boring to me. We know that.
Yeah.
But like how do we expand not just our minds but the minds of our fellow male allies to help
Mhm.
us in this collective fight, but not through throwing up our fists, but in welcoming dialogue and
Mhm.
in being the example and having action items for people to really like take to heart and take into. I always talk about this, like what drives me crazy about those rooms I mentioned where we're all clinking to champagne glasses is it's always the same people that are already
Mm.
at the highest tiers of whatever they set out to do. And it's so performative. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I want examples of the micro ways that you are helping our community. I want
Mhm.
to know,
Mhm.
are you actually coming on as an executive producer to a filmmaker who is making their first or second short film, that having your name is going to lift them out of that as an example? Like, show me those ways. And so for me, I hope that this is a space where every conversation is a way that I'm being part of that micro
Mhm.
and helping
Mhm.
people in their own little ways with whatever they take from it that can help them again. Just keep on keeping on because we need everybody here.
100%, 100%, and it's necessarily incremental work. It's necessarily work that
Yeah.
that is going to be much, especially now that the, the platform that, people who share our values has sort of been, that microphone has currently been taken away, and so this work becomes harder, but also more interesting. It's gonna have to be much more, um one to one, genuine, but there's an opportunity there. I actually do think that in some ways it was nice to it's now that being inclusive is no longer in vogue. you don't have to worry about the performativeness as much anymore. That was really hard as a journalist. I would say that that was the hardest part of my beat for the past 4 years. It wasn't so much confronting people who were overtly hostile to or antagonistic to these ideas. First of all, those were harder to come by, and also that was fine because then you could just talk very directly and sort of maybe even make some progress towards mutual understanding. The really fraught part of my beat with the past 4 years was you would talk to somebody who knows all the right things to say, like every buzzword, check, 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 check. But there's just like nothing behind the
Yeah.
eyes. There's like nothing behind the vernacular, but you can't, how do you pull that out? Like, so you
Yeah.
reproduce the statement that they made and you're like, but I was like, okay, well, I'm quoting you correctly because you said the right things, but
Yeah.
there's no attitude change, there's no heart
That's right.
change, and
Yeah.
it did paper over a lot of the rot. I think the last 4 years there was a lot of shoving things under the rug,
Mhm.
and then they just sort of festered. And so now that the rug was like, they were like, yoink, we hate this rug. You're like, oh my God, it's completely rotten in here. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, we
What did
knew
you think
that.
was gonna
We
happen?
knew
Like,
that. Like,
oh
oh my
god.
God. So, anyways, we'll have a lot of fun
A lot of fun.
a
Well,
lot
I'm
of fun talking
super
about this
yeah,
stuff.
I've said this before, I'm super excited. I'm grateful that you said yes. You yes-anded me. I'm excited for the listeners to get to know you and, again, your brilliance and all the wonderful things you're gonna bring to the table, in the recordings that we'll have, and, yeah, I'm really excited. So let's end on just, like, a really fun note. Um, what is something that is just, like, right now, maybe this week, today, whatever it is that's, like, really bringing you joy and just really filling your well? Anything. It doesn't have to be related to industry.
I will say, like, now that I've been at home, for the last, God, 8 months, both my husband and I are currently looking for work. And so we cannot afford childcare, nor do we need it technically.
Yeah.
Um, and so we spend, and sometimes I'm like exhausted, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll be up late, working on writing something on spec or freelance. And my son, like he gets up with the crows um, he just brings me true joy. Like, there's something about it that cuts through the fatigue.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's still fatigue. Like, there's a lot of, like, lying on the carpet. There's just, like, a lot of lying on the carpet while he climbs over you, but there's a lifting of the spirits because he's almost 2. He's 23 months, and I
Oh.
think that something my husband and I say is as challenging and as unenviable as this moment in our family is right now, we're really lucky that it's happened during this while my son is this age, because I think he's old enough where he's like really like we got to witness his verbal explosion. We got to, like, there's not a first that both of us have missed because we're home with him right now. Hopefully, like, we'll regain stability, like financial and professional stability, in the near future. But I think that we'll always look back on this time and really derive a lot of joy from the privilege of just being with my son 24/7.
And I think I second that, like, the little like, getting to experience my son is almost 10 months old, and getting to
Mm.
experience a little human just, like, figuring out stuff and seeing the things that he looks at that I'm like, "Oh, you find the idea of opening and closing the door interesting." And seeing him come to life and figure himself out is like, "Whoa," you know? And, I look at this tiny human, and I'm like, "I made that in my body." That's still crazy to me, and now
I
you're here
know.
just, like, army crawling and, like, becoming a real boy, you know?
It's so fun. Like, yeah, start like right around like just before 10 months, it gets really fun. And then, I mean, it gets tiring, but it's so fun because you get to, and especially once he starts unlocking language and you get a sense of his interior life.
But it's true, and for me, it helps just, like, contextualize things a bit more and just be able to focus on that in those moments, and then when I'm not with him, being able to say, "Alright, like, this is when I get to, like, go to work and do my
Mhm.
thing and make him proud and leave a legacy for me that's really important of, like, being someone who, regardless of whatever professional accolades I achieve, that when people, say my name in 20, 30 years, it's always with fondness and that I did good things for people and that I helped, and that he gets to be a part of carrying that legacy forward, whatever that means, even if it's just about impacting our immediate community,
Mhm.
like that is so important for me. So it's like he's giving me that now, and I hope I'm giving that to him as well. And then
Mhm.
eventually, as he becomes an adult and gets to like listen to this podcast, you know, he'll be like embarrassed. He'll be like, "Oh, mom, like whatever," but he'll just really understand the plight of how hard not only I've worked but everything that's come before, what my parents
Mhm.
have gone through and traversed for us to get to be here, and the privilege to get to be here and do this very important work, but to also get to have him, he's first generation American for my family.
Mm.
It's the first
Mm.
grandkid. It's like a lot,
Wow.
a lot of pressure, but
Yeah.
yeah. So,
There's so much to plumb. There's so many amazing discussions to be had with the 2 of us and with you and your other
yes,
guests. Like, I mean, I
I
think
can't
that
wait.
yeah, so these are all things to bookmark. I have so many thoughts about that, but I will
We'll
I will reserve them for
bookmark
now.
them, and we'll leave the listeners wanting more, so tune in whenever we get to be lucky enough to have Rebecca's son on the podcast. I'm gonna find all the sun puns that I can, so just get
Oh
ready
my
for
god,
it.
yes, I'm here. I am here for it. You could